Welcome everybody into another edition of 401 Conversations. I'm Mike Mneeley, owner and investment consultant over here at Equity 401k Consultants. And as always, on our now long-running video podcast, I am joined by the one, the only, the legendary Mr. Thad Letzer from Nova 401k Associates. Thad, how are we?
Good, Mike. What's going on?
It is, well, it's another Tuesday here in what was sunny Southern California. The weather's kind of shifted again. I don't know.
I'll take the break.
Yeah.
Fine with me.
Yeah, it's getting to be that fun time of year, isn't it? Where it's going to start to cook.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I was going through some updated training this last couple of weeks and been thinking through some things. And I was thinking, well, what can we talk about for this next edition of our little podcast here? And
What'd you have in mind?
I started thinking about fiduciary best practices. I've talked to a few plan sponsors over the last couple of weeks and some new clients that we've taken on. And, you know, one of the common themes that I find as I get into working with new plans or starting out with plans that are doing startups, you know, for everybody that's aware, Cal Savers has been going on for a while now here in California, and people are still catching up with that. So we're doing startups. And a lot of it is coming to a point where what I'm seeing in a trend is folks understand maybe a little bit of the basics of what their responsibilities are. But there certainly is some areas where knowledge is certainly needed, education is needed. And so I thought today we could talk a little bit about fiduciary best practices, roles, responsibilities, and some of those things, not getting too deep level, because another thing that I'm going to be doing as part of the Equity 401k model is starting in June, going to be doing I haven't decided yet if it's going to be bi-weekly or monthly, but just a quick webinar going through some of these and maybe a little bit deeper dive so that hopefully some folks can check that box for fiduciary education and they can get it complimentary through us if they jump on for a quick fireside chat on fiduciary governance and all that fun stuff. So I wanted to talk today about fiduciary roles and responsibilities, best practices, and just some of the basic things that plan sponsors should be doing. So let's dive into that. I think a good place to start is maybe on roles and responsibilities. Commonly, I think that especially when we're running with small plans, or I should say smaller plans because they're smaller businesses, usually the business owner has to take on a lot of those roles and responsibilities. So, you know, the plan sponsor is the CEO of the plan, right? So they have the fiduciary role and responsibility of overseeing and making decisions. And if they have the ability, picking some of the other folks that are going to help with the plan within the business. So we start there with the CEO, the overseer of everything, which is the plan sponsor. And you guys name that in the plan document, right?
Right.
And then the plan administrator. So that usually is like what the HR rep, the head of HR that helps run some of those day-to-day tasks.
The ministerial tasks.
Yep. And then the trustee, which is kind of like the CFO of the plan, helping maintain the investments and financial decisions around a plan. So that's like the three basic parts. And if it's a smaller company, usually the plan sponsor is taking on all three of those. And I have a couple of those plans.
Would you not add a custodian to the role? I mean, like who's going to hold the money? I mean,
So
or is that?
I think that's where the trustee, right, hires in, you know, those people to take on those responsibilities, right? So we have the stuff within the business and then we have the outside roles. And so at a basic level, whoever the plan sponsor is has to oversee all of that. But those other couple of roles, if they're making decisions in regard to the plan, are overseeing these certain aspects, then they've got fiduciary responsibility, right? So I think it's important that, even the head of HR that thinks that they're not a fiduciary to the plan, well, they are, because they're taking on those ministerial tasks of the plan.
Yeah, anyone touching the plan.
Yeah. And I think that's key for folks to understand that. And because the liability, not to scare people away from, being a part of a plan and running a plan, but being aware of that is super important. And this is where I want to say, the plan sponsor, as part of their fiduciary responsibility and not being an expert to all of these different areas, has the responsibility under ERISA to hire outside help to come in and help with these things, right?
Well, they have the opportunity to outsource those roles, I think, right? And so, I don't want to steal your thunder. I'll defer to you on where you want to go here, but I think that's the crux of it, right? They can outsource a lot of that liability with the right partners. And I want to talk about, because just real quick, I want to take a step back because you're talking about, best practices. Dude, best practice number one is a process, right? So I love that you're already kind of creating a hierarchy of roles and responsibilities. That's part of a process. As you talk about some of these smaller plans, these startups, so many plans come to life without any kind of process, And so to your point earlier, that's where we have plan sponsors that wake up one day and they're like, this is too much work, or, this is too overwhelming, or nobody told me that. Because there wasn't a good process at the front end, nor is there a good process, to manage the plan. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's key, right? Part of being a plan sponsor and being a fiduciary to a plan means that you have to operate with a level of prudency, because your outright goal and objective is to make sure that everything is done in the best interest of the plan participants and their beneficiaries, right? So it's starting a 401k is not just about benefiting you or the business. Like, the main objective is a retirement plan that is there to be in the best interest of the plan participants.
Right.
So process is super key. And I think you pointed to something that a lot of plans end up learning down the road, and that is, well, hey, we just started this plan up with let's say, our payroll provider, right? And we push the easy button. Now we've got a plan set up, but all of a sudden I'm now being told that I've got to, take care of making sure that the investments are looked after. I have to take care of making sure that notices and everything is getting, where it's supposed to go to plan participants. All these other tasks that I didn't understand or didn't think were going to be there.
Yeah. How do you put that toothpaste back in the tube?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, hiring the right team members to come in and help support you as a plan sponsor, especially when you're a small business,
right,
is super key, because we've talked about this before. They're great at providing whatever service they provide, or manufacturing whatever that they manufacture, whatever the business does. That's where they're an expert. But we know that they are not, and probably don't want to be, an expert at picking and choosing investments, understanding, what Secure 2.0 says, or, all these different regulations and what they have to do under that. They just want to provide a benefit.
Right.
For whatever goal that is, they want to provide that benefit. And so I think, and I've always believed, that as an advisor, it's my job to play quarterback and help them with this and help them put those processes in place so that their, overall plan is buttoned up and the least amount of liability issues will arise for them should they ever get audited by the Department of Labor or the IRS.
Yeah, well, that's a very welcomed role from the sponsor's perspective when an advisor is willing to, help in that way.
Right.
Because not all are. Not all of them, define their value prop that way.
Well, and I think the other thing is too, is we should also establish some outside fiduciary roles and responsibilities.
Okay.
So there are different levels of investment advisor fiduciary support. So that can come in the ERISA 321 co-fiduciary support, where the advisor will provide, help build and provide the investment policy statement, as well as help provide a fund menu and a process for reviewing those investments, and bring those recommendations and decisions to the plan sponsor, where if the plan sponsor implements those recommendations, then they can outsource that liability, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they still retain some control if they don't want to make the recommended changes. The other is 338 investment manager, where you're telling the advisor or whoever's going to play that role, look, you make the decisions, you control, the discretion to remove and add investments and monitor and take that process. That's all on you. And the plan sponsor at that point pushes all the control over to the investment manager.
Right. Yeah, that's the difference. There's the discretion, right? 338s typically have discretion where 321s don't.
Right. And, the good news about that is, we're bringing down the plan sponsor's level of liability to the point of oversight, right? And overseeing that 338 and making sure that they're performing as
Right.
they should. The other one that I think is super key, that I think a lot of plan sponsors aren't even aware of a lot of times that exists, is administrative 316 fiduciary support.
For sure. Yeah, there's awareness is growing.
Right?
Mhm.
In that I've got all of this list of things that I have to do every year for this plan.
Right.
And if I'm a busy plan sponsor, that can be a lot of work and a lot of a pain in the rear end every year. To be able to outsource that to somebody like you guys, that at Nova, to say, hey, look, you guys take on 316 support now. So why don't you explain a little bit about what 316 looks like from the TPA's perspective and how that support can be provided to the plan sponsor?
Sure. Well, I mean, I would be quick to differentiate ourselves in the delivery of a 316 solution in saying that Nova is not a 316 provider. Nova is a third-party administrator. We're a TPA. We don't provide 316 services. Our sister company, Administrative Fiduciary Services, provides those co-fiduciary support services. And we think that's a better model because that's an oversight role, and so we think having our opinion is that, a TPA that also provides its own oversight is a bit of putting the fox in the hen house. So, we think it's a better deliverable to have two separate entities working in that fashion, right? Where you've got a separate party overseeing the work that the TPA is doing. But more than just an oversight, it's a real lift. A good, robust 316 is actually doing work for the plan sponsor,
Right.
not just doing oversight. And a good 316 is doing things from, notice distribution, distribution review and approval. A lot of the stuff that takes time for the plan sponsor or the HR manager, or these things that need to be done on an annual basis, and they take time. They distract, the client or the sponsor from their day-to-day tasks of running the business. And so, this becomes a frustration. Signing the 5,500 and getting that filed on a timely basis. Reviewing payroll reports, making sure contributions are remitted on a timely basis. These are all the things that tend to break inside retirement plans. All these ministerial tasks, moving money around, checking, balances, all the things that sponsors forget to do or don't do it on a timely basis. They can outsource that work, to a named 316 administrative co-fiduciary.
Right. And I think if you're a plan and you're a plan sponsor where you're almost looking to hit the easy button, right? In a lot of ways, but you still want, flexibility of, multiple, providers helping with the plan. And you're able to have, that ability. I think having a 316 with a 338 takes a lot of liability off that plan sponsor. And that also helps if you have an HR person that's your administrator, right? Or you have your company CFO as the trustee that, helps with the financial decisions around things, taking a lot of liability off the plate.
Right.
And then what's the big three that come from that? Well, you're still going to have oversight because that never goes away. You always have a responsibility for oversight. And then you are bringing down the day-to-day administrative functions because you're putting that over to the 316. So then really what you really become responsible for is payroll and some of the other tasks that, a 316 can't do.
Right.
So at this point, so here's where we've kind of come, right? So we talked about the roles and responsibilities within the company. We've talked about roles and responsibilities that can be outsourced to outside folks. Let's talk a little bit about some best practices. And I'd like to start with, I think, which is the biggest best practice, is maintaining and keeping a up-to-date fiduciary folder. Even if you've got 316 and 338 support, you still need to be keeping that up.
Yep.
Because if the Department of Labor or the IRS contacts you, usually the first step is going to be by a letter, and they're going to want documentation of things. They're going to give you a list, and you've usually only got 10 days or less to get that information to them.
I'm already losing sleep.
So having a buttoned up and tight, up-to-date fiduciary folder,
Yeah.
whether it's digital or it's a hard copy folder, number one, that is going to make your life so simple if the Department of Labor or the IRS comes knocking on your door.
Very
Because
prudent.
you can turn around and you can send that to them right away, and you're already showing a level of prudency.
Yeah.
That you're up to date and you understand your responsibility.
Yep.
And that's going to make it, that much easier to get through an audit, because then they're not going to start maybe digging through things, as opposed to the plan that's unorganized, doesn't have these things. So best practice number one is keep a fiduciary, file and folder up to date.
Yep.
Another best practice that I see missing as I get into work with plans is documentation.
Yep.
Evidence of meetings, evidence of, an investment policy statement. If you don't document it, it didn't happen.
Right. Yep.
Right. So, quarterly meeting minutes, we provide them for our clients. Every meeting the next day or within the next couple of days, they get quarterly meeting minutes of what was discussed in that meeting.
Yeah, it's good practice.
So that they can put that in their fiduciary folder, documentation that it happened.
Yeah.
If we need to make investment changes, there's emails, there's evidence of that being sent out. There's documentation of proof of, hey, this is what we're recommending. This is what you should change. Then on top of that, any education training or fiduciary training, we document the date that it happened with calendar invitations. We do Zoom registration if we're doing it over Zoom. So you have a list of who registered and who attended. All of these different things, documentation and process.
Do you also encourage, documentation that people opted not to enroll? That's just as important as, hey, Thad enrolled in the plan. Okay, well, duh, that's going to show in the payroll record, but Thad enrolled or opted not to enroll in the plan. And I've got that in the file saying we offered it to him. He just didn't want it.
Right. And you could do that by email, right?
Yeah.
You send them an email with the enrollment guide or kit and the instructions to enroll. And then, we ask that our plan sponsors make sure that they get back in return a response from that employee.
Yeah,
They
that's a good
understand,
CYA. Yep.
right?
Yep.
That they understand that, because like what you're saying, if you didn't document that you gave everybody the opportunity to enroll in the plan, well,
And did you?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also key if you're a startup plan or you're making a change from one provider to another, that you hold enrollment meetings and you
Yeah.
document, who attended that enrollment.
Yep.
So that everybody's aware that happened. So best practices, right? Documentation, super
Good
key,
ones. Yep.
super key. Another that I would say is one that doesn't happen often enough, and that is plan benchmarking. So if you're a smaller plan, you could probably go 3 to 4 years, maybe even push it to 5 before you benchmark. But best practice should be 2 to 3 years, right? So if you haven't requested out for proposals, you haven't requested, and every advisor should provide this because this is transparency. But if you haven't requested from your advisor an advisor fee benchmark, as well as looking at your TPA services and benchmarking that.
All your service providers.
Yeah, all of it. And look, it's not saying that you need to make changes. What it's saying is that you have a process for understanding
And reviewing.
what you're paying and
Yep.
why you're paying it.
Yep.
The Department of Labor is not so much looking at the fees that you're paying.
Right.
They want to know that, hey, the costs are reasonable
Right.
within what you're getting for the totality of the services that you
Right. Yep. For sure.
So it's not saying that you have to go with the cheapest.
That key word is reasonableness.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What they're saying is, your advisor that's charging you, and this happened on a plan, 1.4%. What are you getting for that 1.4%? Are they just showing up and doing an annual meeting? Or is there education meetings, fiduciary responsibility that they're taking on?
Right.
Are they, doing all of these other services to justify, and I still would say that's absurdly expensive, but justifying,
From the participant's perspective, right? I mean, it's not enough to say, oh, the service provider is my brother-in-law. Yeah. How does that help the participant? What value is that to the participant?
right. For what you're paying for your third-party administrator, what are they doing for you that you can justify those fees? It's important stuff to be asking. So that's where a plan benchmark comes in. I think those are like the top 3 best practices.
Yep.
Got a buttoned up fiduciary folder. You're documenting and you have a written process for the things that you're doing in regard to the plan, and you're benchmarking the plan in a reasonable time frame to make sure that your fees are reasonable still and everything is running as it should be.
Those are good ones.
I think if you're doing that, you're probably running your plan at a decent tick.
Agreed.
So with that said, Thad, I think we've covered everything we need to cover, and we really dove into it this week.
Yeah, we did.
Is there anything else you want to add, Thad?
You've nailed all of it. As
Cool.
usual. Well done.
Cool. Well, everybody, thanks for joining. If you have questions, you have concerns, you'd like, just another look and to see how we can help serve and provide some fiduciary support to your plans, please reach out. As always, information will be in the show notes as well as the end of the video. Thad, thanks again for the time.
Good seeing you as always.
Look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Mike.